As many of you in the room will know, that 2023 is Frontline's 10-year anniversary, which is a big moment for us. And personally, when I look back on the last 10 years, there's quite a lot for us to be proud of. We've trained thousands of social workers. We've got an ever-growing number of partnerships with local authorities, which are getting stronger and all the time through different programs. We've launched new programs, which a lot of you will know about. And of course, our wonderful SHAP Fellows, of which there are 2,500 at this point. So we know the amazing work you're all doing out around the country, and incredibly proud of you and hopefully supporting you to do that. But essentially, everything we've done and everything we've achieved is to support the lives of vulnerable children and families. And what we want to do is be thinking about ways at Frontline that we can always make a tangible change in families' lives. The theme of this year's exchange is the future of social work. So really, it is all in your hands and all about you. Your skills, your experience and your practice, your work with children and families, building relationships and bringing change to their lives. Your ideas, your ongoing resilience and your leadership. But the future of social work is a pretty ambitious topic and one that we probably couldn't do justice in just one night. So for tonight's event, we're looking quite specifically at the cost of living and at how social workers can best support families affected by the current crisis and living in poverty. Families with children are more likely than any other group in society to be in poverty, and children are more likely than any other age group to be in poverty as well. In fact, nearly 30% of children in the UK are living in poverty. That is 4.2 million children. The impact of poverty can be devastating. It brings with it material hardship, poor living conditions, and hunger. But it brings way more than that. It affects cognitive development in children, and it damages their life chances. At every stage of education, poor children do worse. It affects children's mental health and that of their families. There is also clear evidence that poverty and its consequences, such as poor housing, undermine positive family relationships. As social workers supporting these families, you face numerous challenges. Not only more families struggling than before, but you may also be finding your budgets are tighter too. And of course, you may be feeling the impact of the cost of living crisis yourselves. So tonight is an opportunity to discuss these challenges, to share ideas, insights, and experiences. And I'm delighted to say that we're very fortunate to have a fantastic panel alongside us for this discussion tonight. I want to say a huge thank you to them for taking part in the event, and I'm sure we'll have the opportunity across the evening to thank them more. But right now I'm going to hand over to the panel to introduce themselves, and then we'll get into some questions and hear a little bit of their thoughts on things. Laurence, can I pass to you first?
So, one, two, testing. Yeah, that's good. So, I am Laurence Guinness, the Chief Executive of the Childhood Trust. The Childhood Trust is London's child poverty charity, supporting and funding some 178 different charities across the capital that engage around 200,000 children, disadvantaged children and young people annually. Our work focuses on improving and scaffolding physical health, mental health, improving children's confidence and resilience, and providing support for preparing children for life as adults with education, training, and employment. And it's great to be here, Mary. And it's the cost of living crisis is something that we have very much been focused on, and I hope to talk a little bit later about some of the research that we've done with social workers with Frontline.
Amazing. Good evening, everyone. My name is Queenie. I've been on sort of the other end of social work, where I've been a young person with lived experience. I made the crazy decision to up and quit my job so that I could pursue a life of entrepreneurship, but also pursue a passion project of mine where I get to support young people leaving care and what their future looks like for them. So incredibly grateful to be here with you all this evening.
Hi, everyone. Is that working?
you. Is that better? Yeah. Okay. Got there in the end. My name's Sophie Howes. I'm the head of policy at the Child Poverty Action Group. So we are an organisation that works to end child poverty in the UK. I work in the policy and research team, but we also have a big welfare rights team that provide welfare rights advice services. We have a strategic litigation team which take legal cases to try and change the law to help the lives of low-income children and families. Thanks.
Hey, great to be here. My name's Dominic Waters. I'm a single dad. I live in the most deprived blocks of my council estate with my amazing daughter. We survive off universal credit, free school meal vouchers, and we've always had a pay-as-you-go gas and electric top up. And yeah, I hope it's okay to say I've faced a lot of challenges, but to bring the inequality of food insecurity into the social work domain has kind of been a lot of the work I do. And great to be here and meet everyone.
Thanks, Dominic, and thanks to all of you yet again for joining us. So I've got a few questions. I'm going to start the ball rolling. We'll hear from lots of our panellists on different questions, but please be thinking about questions you might want to ask too. We're hoping we'll have an opportunity for you to ask questions as they come to mind. So first of all, I wanted to ask each of you what you've seen as some of the key challenges in your work since we've been in the cost of living crisis, and how you've overcome those challenges or found ways to adapting in your work. I wonder, Laurence, if we start with you, and then people can come in as they come to you.
Yeah, I mean, the key challenges for an organisation such as ours that exists to fund the delivery of a very wide range of practical and emotional support for children in need in the capital is that the demand has increased dramatically in the last 12, 18 months. And this comes off the back of, obviously, the pandemic. We've had two crises, once-in-a-lifetime crises, with the pandemic and now with the cost of living crisis. And that comes after a decade of austerity, where youth services have been cut, local authority services have been cut to the bone, local youth projects, children's projects have been forced to either close, merge, or get more creative and more aggressive in fundraising. So we are at the tip of a very large sector of support for children, not-for-profit support, that provides services that don't exist anywhere else. So it's the last line of support. And trying to meet that demand is our biggest challenge. Trying to raise the funds, trying to get the resources, trying to get that out to projects, to communities where that's required, has been challenging. But I've also seen that as an opportunity, because for us, that's why we exist. So that has provided both, a challenge, but also an opportunity. Getting resource from where there's too much, there was money just all piled up. I always say there's no shortage of money in the world, it's just all in the wrong places, to where it's needed. That's the biggest challenge for us.
Thanks, Laurence. Sophie, I wonder if you want to think about from Child Poverty Action Group.
Yeah, I mean, I won't kind of just repeat a lot of what Laurence has said about some of the challenges that we've seen kind of particularly over the last 18 months, but I wonder whether it might be quite helpful at the beginning to just, step back a little bit and just kind of really understand, why, sort of what caused.
Just take this one
out. Cheers. When we think about child poverty, it's just important. Mary mentioned at the beginning that children and families are most likely to live in poverty. I mean, why is that? And the reason for that is that they have those extra costs of raising children. So actually, when you're working on a kind of low-income wage, those wages aren't enough to pay your bills. You've got those extra costs of that children come with, and it's not that you'll have that for the whole of your life, but there's this temporary period where actually your household income needs to be bigger. And so those families are often relying on welfare benefits to top up their incomes. And what we've seen over the last, well, it's actually kind of over 10 years really, is that we've had massive cuts to benefits, which has meant that people are left with a shortfall, and they were kind of left with that shortfall before the pandemic. Kind of, Laurence mentioned, we've had COVID, then we've had this cost of living crisis where all of these, just basic costs are going up and up and up, and there's just no room for movement there. That people just don't have that kind of give in their household budgets, and so that's why you see more and more families like falling into poverty, which you guys will see in your work all the time. And so that's kind of what we're faced with the cost of living crisis, which is a real challenge. But I think it is just important to sort of think of it's children aren't living in poverty just because of the cost of living crisis. This has been going on for quite a long time, and some of it's actually about very purposeful decisions that have been made by the government. They could take different decisions.
It's just been sort of exacerbated by the additional. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Sophie. Queenie, what about you? Any thoughts from you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Obviously, we're no stranger to the times that we're living in, and for the everyday individual, things have gone up, salaries aren't going up with it, and so it's a time where increase in difficulties that families face is astronomical. However, what I feel like in terms of the opportunities that are coming out in the times that we're living at the moment is how we can support and educate families that have children, especially to navigate their way through the times that we're living in, and also to remind them that they have the support from organisations like we are in this room right now, from individuals who understand, and really emphasising on the importance of community and teamwork, and how you can, for example, it could be as simple as how we can lean on our neighbours. I know I'm really young, but I know back in the day, it was easy to knock on the door of your neighbour and be like, hey, have you got some sugar? Or, hey, I need somebody to talk to. But now we live in a society that's quite insular, so we don't even do that. In fact, the average individual probably doesn't even know their next door neighbour. And so how can we actually equip and empower and support families with children to lean in on the community and grow together so that they can navigate these challenging, wobbly times that we live in?
Yeah, that's a great shout. Sort of drawing on relationships and our communities more and thinking about how we do that. Thank you, Dominic. Do you want to say a couple of words on this?
Yeah, I would just say that people living in poverty have been in a cost of living crisis long before the phrase was popularised, and it's only now that these price rises are impacting a broader level of society that is getting the attention that arguably it's deserved for a long time. So, yeah, I would leave it there.
Thank you. That's a very powerful point, well made. Okay, we're going to ask a question now around the idea of research and community. So I'm going to come to you, Sophie, if that's okay for this one. So from your experience of either working with communities or conducting research to help us understand more about children and how children and families can manage the current situation, can you share your understanding of what the most important things are, what the most important needs, are of families who are struggling the most?
I mean, it's really basic and obvious point, but obviously the more cash you can get into people's households, the easier the cost of living crisis and arguably like living in poverty is. And there is, I think it is important to remember that there is support out there that is not necessarily being utilised enough, and that's some of that is kind of on government and local authorities for not making it that accessible. But I think, in terms of people's work, kind of day to day with children and families, just supporting people to access welfare rights advice, make sure they're not we work with lots and lots of families who are not claiming the right benefits, and so actually they can get more money in, but there are additional things like cost of living payments, the kind of energy support, there's the household support fund from local authorities, there's various different pots that people can kind of tap into that I think makes a huge difference. And I do think, if you speak to most families who live in poverty and ask them what would make the most difference to their lives, It's quite simple, actually. And we did, during the COVID-19 pandemic, the government added £20 a week onto people's universal credit payments, and 350,000 children were lifted out of poverty. Like, it's actually, when you look at poverty, compared to lots of other very complex policies, issues, it's actually a really simple one to fix. Give families money, they spend it on their children. That is quite simple. So I think those are the things that at CPAG we're very much advocating for. But I think we want the government to do more, but there are existing schemes that can be tapped into.
Queenie, I can see you nodding. Do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think just sort of something that was going on through my thought process in that moment when you were speaking is around about as we're putting more money, or if there were opportunities that arose that the government were like, hey, we found some money, let's support this particular group of individuals and put more money in people's pockets, which is quite literally what people need, especially right now. I think in addition to that is how we can then equip families to be able to manage what they're given. Because, and I say this primarily from experience, but also from what I've seen as well, it's not necessarily the fact that more money would completely solve all the issues, because that money might go somewhere, something will pop up and that £20 is gone, for example. Or there's just a need or an emergency that might pop up. So it's how can we equip and support families in that respect to know that, okay, I have this extra bit of support, fantastic, but in the case of something that does happen that is unexpected, how can I manage this, and how can I think about the future and long term in order to sustain my family, my children in this present moment?
Thank you. Dominic, do you want to come in on that one as well?
Yeah, I would just say that, it's heartbreaking. I hear my neighbours talk about how, they're washing their clothes less to save £3 a month on electric, or how, because some of them get a bus pass, they're spending all day on the buses to go from supermarket to supermarket for special deals on microwave meals, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but just, the impact of the cost of living crisis. And, I'm talking at a time where the price of food has gone up in the fastest rate in 50 years, as found by the ONS very recently. And so, food insecurity is impacting the already most disadvantaged families. And it's something that needs to be tackled. And I would say that I don't think poverty is as simple to fix as the £20 uplift. But even with the £20 uplift, as someone who gets universal credit, so even on universal credit, just as a part of, and I probably shouldn't focus on this too much, but it impacts a lot of the families that we work with. So universal credit, you have to have the internet to engage in the process. Internet, I don't know how much you guys pay. I pay at least £28 a month. Then on universal credit, you also have to pay council tax. Then with the increased, gas and electric, and it's even more for people that are on pay-as-you-go meters, such as I am. So I think that it was the Trestle Trust, I believe, and Joseph Rowntree Foundation that, said that universal credit, the amount that is awarded each person and family, it doesn't add up. So you literally can't cover the bare essentials, which arguably leads to a lot of children not wanting for things, I should say.
So lots of challenges in terms of I guess we'll keep coming back to what families can do and how we can support sort of families to manage those challenges. I don't know whether you've got anything to add to that, Laurence, at this point.
Yeah, I think from Dominic's earlier point that poverty has existed long before this cost of living crisis, and it was brought much more to the fore during COVID because it was the poor who was disproportionately affected. And to Sophie's point that this current poverty is a choice. It's a political choice that people are disproportionately, affected by policies, and that's okay, because they're not the voters that we want. Under George Osborne, under David Cameron, we started to see a demonization of the poor, that it was their fault, that it was their responsibility. They weren't ambitious enough, they didn't work hard enough, and that was a widening of the inequality gap that has continued unabated. And I think where that gap is widening ever more. As social workers, you will see this. You are feeling the impact of that in your everyday lives, in the work that you're doing. And we can talk about the research that we've done together at some point, where you are having to pick up the pieces because families just don't have enough income. And that's incredibly stressful and incredibly anxiety-provoking, and increases tension in relationships, and children end up suffering because of that. So that's the collateral damage of policies that are unfair, unjust, and increase inequality and favor where the rich, policies where the rich just get richer and the poor just get poorer. And that's really, my observation.
Can I just add to what Laurence has said, because I think it is a really interesting point about those narratives that are propelled by the government, because they are really powerful and they're really strong, and they end up kind of directing what policy measures we see to address some of this stuff. And that can be very much this idea of it's about poor parenting, it's about people who don't know how to budget. Actually, when you have to live on a really low income, I think for lots of people they're the best budgeters, actually, because it's all the examples that Dominic was just talking about, how can I get £3 a month out of my budget? It's because by doing less washing. So having to think about those things all the time in a way that lots of people don't. So I think those kind of those narratives that basically put it onto the individual of you're experiencing poverty because because of poor life choices, basically. We've all got a role to challenge that, I think, and show that yes, people are not completely powerless, but there are some big structural things going on as well.
Absolutely right. And social workers are going to be the people who see firsthand how families operate. And your point around if a family has an extra £20, it's going to go to the essential looking after the needs of the children, isn't it? So yeah, I think that's a great point, Sophie. And move us on to the next question, which I'm going to direct to you, Queenie, if that's all right. So how important is it that we remain intersectional in our approach when supporting children and families who are most at risk in this crisis, considering that most will be facing multiple forms of oppression due to their identities? How can social workers be intersectional in their approaches?
Yes, so we all know that the demographics that are centred within children and young people in care are diverse, young people coming from all sorts of backgrounds, all walks of lives, all forms of challenges and traumas that you have to see firsthand and deal with. And so it's really important, in my belief, that these are some of the things that we have to highlight and ensure that we're reminding young people, first and foremost, that we might not have walked in the shoes that you've walked in, but we see you, we hear you, we understand where you're coming from, and we want to support you with where you're going. I think for young people that are in care, when they think about those important individuals in their lives, whether it's a social worker or their corporate parent, it's not really an exciting thing that they want to talk about, especially if you're in school and, people are talking about what they're doing with their parents over the weekend or where they're going or stuff they're doing over the holidays. And then you're like, oh, well, I'm meeting my social worker on Friday. Things like that, it's really daunting on them, especially if you come from, an ethnic minority background or you're neurodiverse or whatever the case may be, however you identify or present yourself. There are so many challenges, and my encouragement for social workers is just to ensure that the young people know and understand that their voices are being heard. And whilst there are so many young people that have to be looked after, that there's a way in which we can make individual young people feel special, feel heard. I've come across individuals and cases where even my own sister, where their social worker will say something like, "Oh well, yeah, I have another young person that I have to deal with on the other side of town. I don't really have time for this right now. Can't answer your phone call. Can't listen to you right now." Da, 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 da. And it's like you're projecting whatever it is that you're dealing with. Or I have a number of case files. Okay, fantastic, great, but that's not the young person's problem. And so knowing that that young person has to also go home and deal with their internal challenges or challenges of how they feel different when they're in social environments. And so kind of remembering that we should park that at the door when it comes to young people, and just remind them that they are special and that they're no different from young people that they come across in school with their peers and their mentors, that kind of thing. So there are ways in which we can intersect and cross over different groups, but also reminding them that they're also part of this, part of a community, and that they are valued.
Really tuning into where they are and making sure they know that you're doing that. Yeah, great. Laurence, I wonder if you want to think about the special educational needs piece of work now. This might be one of the spaces to do it.
Yeah, when we're talking about intersectionality, we have been particularly concerned after meeting and talking to groups of children about the impact of the cost of living crisis on children with special educational needs and disabilities. And as part of that, we partnered with Frontline to ask social workers across the country how the cost of living crisis is impacting children with SEND, because they are a particularly vulnerable group, as you'll know. Impact of budget cuts, of the cost of living crisis, of pandemic, has had a really devastating impact on children with SEND. We wanted to understand the extent to which that might be so, and actually through the lens of social work, but also through asking children themselves. We co-designed some of the research with children with SEND, asking other groups of children with SEND about their experiences. That was really insightful. But we also asked parents. We polled all the charities that we're supporting. Let me just go through it quickly, because I think it'd be really interesting to just get some of the headlines. So we spoke to 69 social workers representing 655 children. That'll tell you something about caseloads. In fact, one social worker said they had 122 children in their caseload. 122. You imagine that? I mean, I was like shocked when I saw that. The majority of in fact, is your caseload of children with SEND increasing due to the cost of living crisis? 52% said it was. So half of social workers said their caseload is increasing of children with SEND because of the cost of living crisis. They said that mental ill health in the home, 93% of the social workers said mental ill health in the home was increasing. Is the severity of cases for children with SEND increasing due to the cost of living crisis? 74% of the social workers said yes. This is all over the country. And the thing actually the big question I wanted to ask, is it disproportionate to children without SEND? So we asked that question. Is this increasing disproportionately relative to non-SEND children? And 53% of the social workers said it was. So over half said it's increasing disproportionately. Let me read out some of the comments, because I've got 6 pages of stuff here on the mental health impact. So this is verbatim from what social workers have actually said in the research. Waiting times to be seen by mental health support seems to be getting longer, and thresholds are increasing. It's harder to get access to CAMS. They'll say it's behavioural when social care have a different perspective. Unable to access CAMS, long waiting lists, unable to access therapists, inpatient wards are full, waiting lists, or released to the community too early and need to return, which doubles the trauma and costs. It needs to be done correctly in the first place. Another social worker said, CAMS waiting list is a joke. It has been for a long time. However, it's even worse now than ever. Another social worker said, battle to access more than before. Longer waiting list, lack of CAMS support. Services are massively overstretched. These are all different voices. Waiting times are 6 months longer now for children and young people. Hospitals unable to meet children's needs in sufficient time due to resource. So you get the idea. So this research with your peers was so valuable and insightful. We had a big piece in the Guardian, Observer, we had a piece on ITV, but it certainly opened our eyes and I think we'll be doing more of this with Frontline and with social workers, because you are the, you know, as it says on the tin, Frontline. You are doing that work, and for the most vulnerable children, that is, you know, invaluable to an organisation like ours to understand really what's happening in wider society and what the challenges are.
Thanks, Laurence. And I think I wouldn't imagine that those stats are a surprise to most people sitting in the room, because it's what you'll be living and experiencing and will have done for many months, if not years. So, but it's powerful, heard in that kind of the scale and being brought to life. So thank you. I'm going to sort of move to sort of a bit of the different angle, which is what we've done really clearly is state the challenge which we're all living within and facing, and you're working with families who are facing this challenge day in, day out, to think a little bit about what might be some tools and techniques and how we can sort of support families and what people think about that. So, Dominic, I'm going to come to you for this one, if that's okay. Can you share with us any examples, tools or support that you may have used with families who are struggling, that our social work community here today could utilise to support the children and families that they are working with?
Yeah, so if it's okay, I'll give a reflection from my placement. It was actually my first 70-day placement, and I was put in a local authority contracted, like semi-supported housing scheme for high-risk young children in care between the ages of, actually it was like 15 and 25, depending on the mental health support they needed. And I saw how the children were reliant on donations from local businesses and trips to the food bank to meet their like nutritional needs. And like I don't want to go too deep into it, but at the time I'd be going home to my council estate and I'd have like notices seeking possession of my council flat, mine and my daughter's council flat, due to like wrongfully found rent arrears because of like failures of the universal credit system. I'm probably highlighting that twice now, but yeah, and it really resonated with me because so the council estate that I live in, there's only one shop and it stocks like the lowest quality of food produce. And so yeah, I really felt for the young people in care, but I kind of thought like learning social work was new to me, but you know, being on placement and trying to research and everything, food insecurity wasn't discussed in social work at all. And if it was only in America and I think Canada at the time. And just how like they were left with something that would impact their well-being, but their parents are the corporate parent. So like I'm living in poverty, the corporate parent isn't by definition poor. So the injustice of that, and also as the student, I often had to take the young people to the food bank. But moving on, I've kind of, it really sat with me, and I've developed a food inequality framework that I wish I could show you, but we're going to send it out if people are interested at all. And it comes from, you know, actually living that inequality, and it also mirrors the idea from like micro, like on the individual level, to meso, on the more community, and then to, you know, the macro and more systems points of impact. And I would just leave with that. At present, as I speak, not to be negative, but I don't know how, the profession can claim a like anti-oppressive approach when food insecurity still isn't noted in our standards, our frameworks, or our curriculums. But I'm really hoping that the work I do, and maybe I'll get onto the campaign I've started, and my work with Frontline, hopefully moving forward, can like make changes for, you know, the next lot coming.
Thanks, Dominic. Do you want to just give us a little bit of a hint of how that framework, how you're using that framework, like how you're sharing it?
No, yeah, and good question. So at present, I've designed like a pioneering poverty and food insecurity module or training that is putting how lived experience can influence and improve practice. So I've already delivered that to, and I don't want to get it wrong, I think it's like 10, I would say, forward-thinking local authorities across the country, and also universities, and a lot of, well, some in particular local authorities, and shout out to, I don't want to say it wrong, Northamptonshire. Yes, they really want to make the framework like an integral part of the learning and practice of the teams. So there's lots of levels to it, and I can't sum it up in like 1 minute, but it's also like the best approach to these conversations with families, and moving from this idea of that I think you pointed to earlier around how poor people are often viewed as like undeserving, and working with the community and resources. Yeah.
Great, thank you. That's great. Does any other members of the panel can think about sort of tools or go on, Jenny.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in and say that I think one thing that I'm pretty sure that you've probably already thought of is how we can also plug young people and their families to groups outside of the sector that might be able to support. So outside of my day-to-day, I sit on the board of a number of charities and support organisations that might provide youth services or youth zones for young people. Another charity is a counselling and therapeutic services organisation, and so we're very, very aware of the fact that the CAMS list is never ending, and our list is soon joining that. However, what I found to be really profound in some of the stuff that we do is kind of like the outreach work that we do. So we have this really cool talk bus that travels around the local borough, where young people can just hop on and just sit and just be like, oh my God, I've come from school today and this is what happened. And the number of young people that come on board on a day-to-day basis, and you might not be in a room having a one-to-one conversation with somebody, but actually you're in and amongst youth workers or familiar faces that you've built a relationship with, and you can just be kind of offload and just have a friendly face to talk to, or go to a space where actually you can engage in something that's tangible. And we know that there is kind of a positive power around soft play, for example, inclusive spaces that get you interactive, that could also prompt young people to just talk about how they're feeling, so that we know exactly how to support them. So I think there's something there when it comes to actually plugging young people to spaces and helping them to know that actually it's a safe space that you can go to, even if you don't feel comfortable talking to us, that there are people out there that can support you, and that we can work in partnership with.
Great, thanks, Queenie. Laurence, do you want to come on that?
Well, just quickly, the good news from my perspective is that 75% of the social workers that we surveyed said they knew where to make referrals, and they knew where the services that were available in their areas for children and parents. But that means 15% didn't, and I think that's where there could be improvement in sharing with your colleagues, with your peers, where the good services are, where has capacity, where the new things that have opened. Just being aware that not everyone knows where to make those referrals, and just spreading that information around.
Thanks, Laurence. Sophie, do you want to come in, or have you? Most things have been covered. Right, brilliant. Thank you, Dominic. I'm going to come to you again for this one around. Being really aware that the cost of living crisis is not just affecting children and families that social workers support, but also social workers themselves. And what advice would you give to anyone here today who may be concerned about their own circumstances?
Wow, big question. So I will so I developed, so the amount of barriers I can't even demonstrate or express that I've found, which I think is because some people with influence within our profession and wider might have such a distance from the daily realities of poverty, but to kind of highlight how food insecurity is impacting the most disadvantaged families in society, I developed a concept and a campaign called Food is Care. So bringing the inequality of food insecurity directly into the social work arena. And it was the research which we conducted, I think it's literally 1 year ago, like to now, it showed how that social workers are both largely concerned about the lack of access to necessities that families are experiencing, coupled with their own. And that I wouldn't say that from if it's, to speak freely, I don't think that's all social workers, but I think there is a little bit of a lack of protection for social workers from impoverished backgrounds that I can personally speak to not existing. And I hope that's something that, through communal work and panels like this, that can be highlighted and addressed moving forward.
Great, thank you. I'm going to move us to our last question, which I'm going to ask each of you to respond to. But I'm going to ask you to start, Queenie, if you wouldn't mind. It's really simply, what is the one thing you would like to see change in the future so that social workers can support those in need in the best way?
One thing I will say is essentially collaboration. I'd love to see a lot more collaboration. There are a lot of organizations, entities, groups, individuals that are kind of working on their lonesome. I don't even know if that's a word, but I'd love to see a lot more collaboration with groups. I know that especially for like charitable organizations, they might be in competition when it comes to funding, but actually what happens when we see a community come together, organizations, social workers, religious establishments like families, support groups and things like that, when we come together and say, hey, our children, our young people need us, their families need us, especially in the times that we're living in right now. And I forgot to mention this earlier, but like even for some of the youth projects that I'm involved with, like simple things like we feed young people every evening for like £1, like getting social workers to know a lot more about this and the other 50% to be aware about information like this so that, families, parents can know that, okay, hey, I might have 3 kids and it's going to cost X amount of money to feed them this week. But if there's somewhere that they can go, have a bit of fun and get fed for like £1 or even in some cases for free, fantastic. But yeah, collaboration is something that I'd love to see moving forward.
Great, thank you. Sophie, how about you?
I'm going to go quite big picture on this, if that's okay. But I think something we would really like to see is we're coming up to a general election, we're going to have a new government, and I think whoever is elected needs to just have a plan for how they're going to tackle child poverty, because that would actually free social workers up to do your job. Like, I think that social workers, teachers, anyone working on the front line is having to do so many things that actually wasn't part of your core role, and you're having to kind of really do that firefighting. And actually, if we had a targeted plan for how to tackle child poverty, then I think it would really free up practitioners to be able to work kind of meaningfully with families rather than have to just do that kind of firefighting. So just very briefly, the things we would want in that plan from CPAG's perspective is there are 2 policies which are really driving up child poverty in the UK. One of them is the 2-child limit, which you might be aware of. So if you have more than 3 or more children and that third child was born after 2017, you don't get any more support for those children. I'm sure you probably have families affected by this policy. It's driving families into really, really deep poverty. And if the government abolished it, it would lift hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty overnight. So we would want to see the abolition of the 2-child limit, an expansion of free school meals, so that actually every child just gets a meal at lunchtime in school. It's not that expensive. It would make a huge difference to children's lives. And then an increase to child benefit as well. So just that's a benefit that has lost lots of value over the years. It's really easy, like over 90% of children and families claim child benefit. It's just a really easy benefit to claim, even if you're not claiming anything else. People get it, it's reliable, it doesn't kind of cut off when you have problems with universal credit, it's just always there, and if you just put a little bit of money into child benefit, it would make a huge difference. So, those are just 3 things that would, make such a difference to children and families. And then I think, people who are working with those children and families can actually just get on with doing the job.
I think that's a great shout, the sort of wider impact. We're talking specifically about social work tonight, but you're absolutely right around teaching and lots of other, people work in roles where that's being kept away from what they came into the profession to do. Yeah, thank you. Dominic, do you want to, what would be your, you can have 3, since Sophie had 3.
Am I allowed? Okay, I'll just quickly start. As someone whose child has always got free school meal vouchers, I understand this kind of, and I'm an ambassador for one of the charities or organisations that is pitching for wider free school meals, and I think it is, it's a very valid ask. I would say though, as someone whose child is on free school meals, every week I get a text from my daughter, "Dad, can you top up my thumb?" Because that's how she pays for her free school meals. Because £3, what they were getting at the beginning of COVID, it doesn't, you get a lot less food now for the same amount of money. So I would say that the amount for each child needs to be increased. That's one of the asks of Food is Care, my campaign that's going to be turning into a charity soon. So please look out for that. Also, if it's okay to just share that I wouldn't have the confidence or the, or even the language. So I'd say a positive for social work. I wouldn't have the language to kind of discuss anti-discriminatory issues before I started studying our profession. And so I think it's credit to social work and our frameworks and everything, and also coupled with Marcus Rashford and his amazing work, that it wasn't just about, for me, it wasn't just about increasing the free school meal vouchers across the holidays. It was also kind of tackling the shame around discussing the fact that, I'm having to use the food bank, or that my cookers from the local homeless charity as are my sofas, or the mold that's all up and down my block, or the bins that don't get collected, or so much. So I think, credit to social work on that, and Frontline for having me here, and Marcus Rashford. But I would say that also food insecurity continues to not be included in, and other elements of the daily realities of poverty continues to not be included in our professional guidance. So if I had one ask, and that I've kind of located that area of impact, would be that it's included and in our curriculums.
Thanks, Dominic. Go on, Laurence.
Well, I've got a radical idea, a big vision. How about, instead of being the reactive kind of fourth emergency service that social workers are, you're always dealing with problems, you're always dealing with issues. How about most of your work is preventing those things from ever happening in the first place? How about being the glue that holds communities together? How about being the one person that has that knowledge and expertise to stop any kinds of issues from ever getting to the point where there are crises, where there's a breakdown, where it's become an emergency? That would be my vision and my idea for social workers, actually, and empowering you to be those people that prevent these things from happening in the first place.
Where can I see a hand first, and I will dive towards you with a microphone safely, of course. There you go.
Thanks. I was interested in the idea that local authorities were interested in being involved in research, frameworks, pilot projects. And I guess a question I had was around whether the local authorities that are expressing that interest, are they local authorities that tend to be feeling the impact more in that the families in their area are more in areas of deprivation, or is it local authorities that have got a little bit more money and are able then to think and slow down and have the resources to put things into practice?
Thanks, Ali. Got one more question at the back. Did I see a hand? No? Okay. Yeah, that's it.
Hi, I suppose just interested in your thoughts about whether you think too many children are coming into care because of poverty. I often think about what would happen if we gave all the money to families that we spend on children in care. Obviously, it's not always, it's not always going to be the right thing to do, but I just wondered what your thoughts were about that.
That's a great question. Thank you. Okay, so first of all, we'll come to you, Dominic, I think, to think about the local authorities you've been working with, particularly with relation to your framework, and I guess others as well in terms of LAs you've worked with. Is it one possibility? Is it that the need is higher? Is it that there's more money, or is it the leadership being a bit more forward-thinking? Would be the other thing I wondered about.
From my experience, I think it's not that they've got more money. I think and shout out, to Northamptonshire and St Helens, but I think it is where the demand is increased. I think the demand is widespread, but it's the attention, as you've kind of pointed to in the follow-up to the question, that the leadership of that local authority designate to those issues. I have to be a little bit careful about how I phrase my response to your question, but I think it's a very good and astute question. But I would, if I had to, I'd say it's the ones that have increased deprivation.
Sophie, Laurence, I saw you both nodding.
Well, I wanted to address this lady's comment about the cost of, I mean, you raise a very, very salient point about the cost of dealing with crises as opposed to prevention. And I mean, what does a emergency foster care placement cost a week now? What is it? You tell me. Yeah, 300 to 5,000. Yeah, exactly. So it's a very wide range. Let's take a median of that, like 2,500 a week. Okay, and I mean, we were talking about £20 a week making a transformative difference, and we know that, we all know in this room that if you were to give a family, not all families, but some families, another £100 a week, that could make the difference between a situation where the child needs to be removed and to one that doesn't. It's just common sense. So this is what I was talking about earlier about having a preventative mindset and investing in that heavily as opposed to having to deal with a crisis. We know that, I mean, there's been a lot of discussion rearing its head again about private equity and care homes, children's homes, and corporate parenting that you mentioned, Dominic. There's the forces of capitalism are kind of aligned against prevention and against, because there's a lot of money to be made. As taxpayers, we're giving our money away to remove children, to put them in care, and fuel that whole system. And we're not getting a good outcome from that. Children especially are not getting good outcomes from that. So I think reversing that means investing in families. It means front-loading. It means having social workers making those decisions, trusting social work, to apportion funding, at the level of you yourself making that decision and being empowered to do that with the families that will benefit from that. And that's the thing. It's the power should reside. I was talking to Chaz earlier. You have the knowledge and the expertise. You should be managing those budgets, not some distant kind of bureaucrat that has no kind of connection to what families are actually going through.
I don't think anyone in the room would argue with that, and the sort of notion of people closest to the work having say over budgets. I think again, we've done some work in Frontline on that topic, and for me it comes down to a leadership and a culture question, which is the main sort of organising factor around that. So I just want to come back, Sophie, to see whether you had anything to add around that last point around what it might be that makes some local authorities look at this in a different way than others.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably a combination of all the things that you've talked about, really, isn't it? I think it's about seeing that need in your communities. I think it's about, having some resources, and that's obviously been a real challenge for local authorities. But I think you also really do need that leadership as well. So I think just a couple of examples of kind of good practice that we've seen at CPAG, and I appreciate it's not a local authority, but in terms of a kind of local government institution is Greater London Authority. We worked with Greater London Authority, and that was around co-locating welfare rights advice in schools, and that was a model that was really successful, and actually lots and lots of people who'd never kind of walked through the doors of Citizens Advice kind of accessed this advice that was in a school, and we got like hundreds of thousands of pounds back to families in unclaimed benefits, which is much more sustainable than supporting access to food banks, for example. And that was something that GLA kind of funded and piloted and is now kind of rolling out in London, which is really positive. But we've also, we've worked with Blackburn with Darwin, which is a local authority in the northwest, which I don't think has like many resources, but I think they have really high level of need in their community. And they, in the absence of, I talked about kind of what's the one thing we want? Like, we need a child poverty strategy, a plan for tackling child poverty, and this local authority is trying to do that on a local level. And, that's obviously very hard because they don't have the same kind of levers to pull that the national government does, but they're still trying to think about what is it that we can provide on a local level, because they can really see that need. And I think that is around really good local leadership.
So similar to Dominic, need coupled with leadership that can see the need and the damage that the council's taking. Okay. Anyone else want to come on either of those points?
I would just add to your point. I think that it would be, how do you put it politely? I think that there are some local authorities that put a higher attention on anti-oppressive practice, and I think that does need to be acknowledged, and I think that is vital. It's also in terms of the resources and the money, but it's also the focus on our practice and how we engage with the community. I think it probably needs to be explained a bit more, but I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Dominic.
Could I just add just a comment on the kind of, is it a better use of resources to just give families money rather than invest in these kind of quite high expense kind of interventions? Just, something that may or may not be on your radar, but I think it's quite interesting, is looking at universal basic income trials. So I don't know if you guys are aware that these are kind of taking place all over the world, actually, which is looking at basically giving people kind of money in a way that actually, is enough to live on, which kind of makes sure that people can meet those essential costs that we've been talking about, and kind of frees them up to, find meaningful work or study or do whatever it is that they want to do. And there's a pilot in Wales, which has actually been targeted at care leavers, which is interesting, and I think will be interesting to see the results of that, because obviously that's a group that we're particularly interested in today. But yeah, that's obviously that would be quite radical, probably politically very difficult to kind of implement at a grand scale, but I think it kind of really speaks to that point of if people have their kind of material needs met, what can flourish from that.
I don't know much about that. I wonder if on that note, if people have resources or information they think would be useful to share with people, then feel free to send those through after, and we can make sure we circulate to everyone here today. But thanks, Sophie. Laurence, did you want to?
Well, I was going to say it's £1,600 a month is the amount that is being trialled as a universal basic income with the care leavers in Wales.
But maybe not when you compare it to a placement.
You compare it to £5,000 a week, of having to safeguard a child. £1,600 a month might be really, good value for money.
But just to say, then there's that separation that even I observed as a student, that the care scheme might be receiving £5,000 a month for that child in care. That doesn't mean that child in care is receiving £5,000 a week or month, even in terms of services. So I think that differentiation needs to be addressed.
Thanks, Dominic. Quinn, do you want to come on any of this, or any thoughts, or?
Not necessarily, but I was just going to completely agree. Like I've in the case of like households that receive maybe the higher end of a placement cost or whatever, the room that young person is living in is nuts, and you wonder, like, you're getting paid for this and they're living like this, or that young person just doesn't feel supported necessarily from their carer, for example, or might not feel heard by their social worker, or whatever the case may be. So I know that the system, the grand scheme of things, is very flawed, but there are areas like that where it's just like, okay, but how do we sort of insert ourselves to be that bridge and that support, because we've already accepted that we live in a fallen world, but our young people still need us. And so even when I think about that scheme, for example, I'd love to see the outcome of that as well, especially particularly around the work around children and young people leaving care, and the support that they get from that, but also how that is managed. I came across a case the other day where a young person went to university, just struggled a lot with past trauma, mental health challenges, received when you get money from university, student loan. But they spent all of the student loan money buying substances that were abusing them and eventually overdosed. Not saying that that's the case for everybody, but I just wonder, as much as the financial support is really important, all the other tools that they need around that as well, and that community support, knowing that actually we as a people care about them and see them as well, as much as we're supporting their day-to-day needs.
Thank you. That's a great point. Okay, I think that's the first two questions covered. Go on, Tessa. Do you want to just try yelling the question out rather than us running around with? Yeah, go on.
One of the first jobs I did was working in a converted corner
back to that point, Tessa, isn't it, around the idea of trusting those on the ground to do what's right and respond, which has come up a few times here tonight. What are others' thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of 100% agree with everything you've said, really, but I guess not going back quite as far as 1985, but I think, if you look at, the last time we had a really kind of concrete plan to tackle child poverty, that was under the new Labour government. So between kind of 1997 up to kind of 2010, and over 1 million children were lifted out of poverty during that period. It was the biggest kind of decrease in child poverty in an OECD country. Like, it was quite a huge achievement. And that was actually talking to this gentleman's question about, like, how do you achieve that stuff? And actually it was about resources. It was about government committing money to things like Sure Start centres, to universal services for children and families, those types of things that you're talking about. But I also think it's about, like, really strong leadership, and it was like a kind of, it was something that sat within number 10. The Prime Minister was kind of like looking after that as a plan. It was very much kind of, something that was really prioritised. And, I think Laurence said, to a point, child poverty is a political choice, and it is, because, you have to decide when you get into power, I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things in my term in government, and if you decide to put child poverty on that list, then you can affect real change, and we have seen that in the past, and we can do it again.
Absolutely. Others' thoughts?
I just want to thank you for sharing that expertise and context and historical, perspective, because I think, for many people in the room, they've come into social work at a time when the perspective has been very different, and the vision is, quite the opposite from the picture that you painted. And I think to be reminded of a time when there was more of a kind of community prevention perspective, and that there was more, kind of collective impact, and that was supported, and that was what social work was about, is really, really important. And I think that, for me, from my perspective, and our organisation, and we were talking to Sophie about this, to have a vision, to have hope of change, of something different, is so powerful. Because what we do know is that the work you're doing at the moment is really, really difficult and really hard. And I think we need to be honest about that. And it shouldn't be this hard, and it shouldn't be this difficult. Right. And you shouldn't have to carry that much stress and trauma and difficulty. And there is a better vision. There is something more hopeful ahead of us. So I think it's really good to share that. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurence. Are there other questions? It worked. Yeah, that's a really. Yeah, that's exactly what the observation I was going to make. The power of language, and as you quite rightly point out, the sanitising almost of the word poverty, and to make it something that's just happening to us rather than actually a conscious choice. I think it's a really great observation. What are people's thoughts on that? Any other follow-ups?
I agree. I think that it kind of dilutes the experience of the most disadvantaged, and it makes it more of a kind of shared experience that suits one way of seeing society and inequalities. And I would just add that, so I was doing my qualification just before COVID started, and arguably quite a forward-thinking educational body. But we only had, and it was a master's, and we only had one, I'm sure it was one, but if not, definitely only 2 sessions that were discussing poverty in a social work qualification. I think that is atrocious. It doesn't reflect the work that is actually done on the ground. And just to, back up the point, it was found that, if you're in the most deprived areas of the country, you're 10 times more likely to have a social worker involved in the raising of your child than if you live in the more affluent spaces of the country. And that was Child Welfare Inequality Project, I think. Yeah. So, yeah, I think there's multiple areas that need to, that points to, as I probably stressed already, but I think it's also in the education, it's also in, the professional practice, and also the policies and guidance that govern the work and law that we do. So, yeah, I don't want to, I try not to be overly positive, but I feel good being here and being able to even express these things, and hopefully more work with Frontline to bring around action that can help equip us and move us forward with our practice in these hard times.
Thanks, Dominic. Absolutely. Queenie.
I just wanted to just agree with what you're saying, and in the sense that, the fact that it's being glamorized, just to cover up kind of truly what's going on in the world, is crazy to think. But what I see, I'm a bit of an optimist, you see, and I like to see the good out of everything. But what I love seeing is the fact that we're in this room today, we're having these conversations, and there are people out there who are genuinely thinking beyond the politics, beyond the people who make the decisions, and actually the little change that we can affect and how far that can go. You're looking at someone who was once in foster care with a white foster carer, wasn't prioritized their heritage, was adopted, taken to another country. I was raised in Africa, where you're either rich or you're poor. End of story. There is no such thing as social work. They don't prioritize things like that. And then coming back here, going back into care, and then experiencing homelessness. So the fact that there are actually people and genuine individuals who are looking out for children and young people in this sector, despite the difficulties that the society that we live in presents itself, or the decisions that are being made in Parliament, I think just as a word of encouragement that we are in the right place, and we are putting minds together and thinking about these things, and that the power and the tools when it comes to collaboration or collaborative thinking and the benefits that can have to children and young people is so important. And just to, as hard as it may seem, look at the bright side in everything. That's what I wanted to say.
It's a great. Thanks, Queenie. That's very powerfully made point again. There's been lots of powerful points this evening. I think we've got what we're wondering now is whether people want to have a think about some of these reflections and just think amongst yourselves, and even if you want to discuss amongst yourselves, but certainly these are some prompts. We're very clear as well. This has been a really, hard times is the best way to describe it. It's difficult. There's no doubt what we're talking about here are big national political issues, which are having a kind of a very tangible, impact on those who are most vulnerable in society. So there's something about recognising that, and also recognising exactly as Queenie's just said that there's lots of grassroots activity happening, which and workarounds and ways to kind of to make things better and improve the situation. And that's absolutely what we're hoping the focus to be that we sort of finish up on tonight.